Good evening, everyone. My name is Grant May. This is the weekly briefing. Welcome back. I'm excited to be back here with you today. You may have observed my unusual outfit today, and by that I really just mean my hat. I'll get into it later in this episode, but I just want to say you better be watching on YouTube. YouTube is the place to listen to this podcast. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. But welcome back to the weekly briefing with Grant May. We got a lot to cover. Today I'm going to be talking about two trends I've seen a lot in the news recently that I don't think are very good for the American public as a whole, and trends that I think Christians should be aware of and keeping up with. But back to my hat. So currently I am wearing my colonial tricorned hat. So instead of wishing you a good afternoon, I should have wished you a good morrow. Because today I recently went to go see a reenactment of the iconic Liberty or Death speech by Patrick Henry. There were several people acting out the speech that took place at the Virginia Congress. It was an assembly as Virginia debated what to do, whether they were going to prepare a militia in the event that war arose with England, or whether they were to remain loyal to England. And so it was a very, very inspiring, very just awesome experience. But I couldn't help but notice that the demographic that was there were all old white people who were about to pass away. And it made me scared. I don't know what's going to happen to this country when they do, when the boomers leave. Who is here to protect us after the boomers are gone? So it's important to think about. We got to always stay 1, 2, 3 steps down the line, because they're the only people I know that are willing to get dressed up as Patrick Henry and sing God Bless America, waiting on the other generations to follow suit. But I don't have much hope for them. Just kidding. I do. And I don't think the interesting thing was, as I was sitting there, I started thinking, I was like, this is really cool what they're doing. But by the same token, I don't think George Washington or Thomas Jefferson were LARPing and live action role playing as, I don't know, Augustine, or give your fighter from the Middle Ages or the Renaissance or the era of Christendom. I don't think any of them were LARPing and role playing. They were actually making history themselves. So it's a two-sided coin. Like, maybe our generation, maybe Generation Z, is going to be the generation who gets things done and actually brings about a mass American Renaissance, a return. Today, I want to talk about something that I've been seeing a lot, and that is that our progressive nature of American politics has given us a regressive country. The vision of our founding fathers we've fallen far from, and I think a hasty return needs to happen if we want to enjoy this country any longer. There is this idea that I think permeates a lot of people, Christian, non-Christian, on both sides of the political aisle, that they just want to live a quiet and happy life. They want to, live a good life, retire with a pension, enjoy the rest of their days in retirement, maybe have a grandkid or two, and then pass into the next life. And I think that's a product of a very scary culture. Because you're not looking to pass along greatness to your posterity. And that is something that the founding fathers were fixated on. You read the preamble to the Constitution, that was one of their primary aims. The reason they risked their life, the reason they pledged their lives, their liberty, and their sacred honor to a cause that they knew very well could end up killing them, was that they wanted to create a nation for their children. And that's important to note. They wanted to create a nation for their people that they could be proud of. It was the same idea that built the Catholic cathedrals across Europe. We don't build beautiful churches anymore, and that's a really sad thing. But the people who built these cathedrals, who conceived of the idea and who worked on them, many of these cathedrals took hundreds and hundreds of years to build. And so the people that funded them, the people that started them, they never lived to see their completion, but they did it because they believed it was right for them to pass. They believed it was right. They believed it was noble to pass something good along to their posterity. And so I think the same needs to be said of America in this 21st century. It feels like we are on the brink of a lot of things. The societal decline has kind of coalesced, and it feels like it's reaching a climax. And there's one of two ways we can go. We can go the way of Thomas Cole's painting Destruction of an Empire, which captures the Roman Empire falling to two things. It captures them falling to the barbarians outside their gates, and it pictures them falling to themselves, their own vice, their gluttony, their sexual deviancy. And I think America stands on, there's a lot of comparisons that could be made there. The barbarians waiting at our gates, sneaking in, sacking our cities, stealing our resources. And then we're also committing civilizational suicide on the inside as we pleasure ourselves to death. So just an interesting thing for you to be aware of, for you to keep track of. We need to escape the mindset that we need to escape, that the goal is just to live a good life. The goal is actually more than that. The goal is to pass along something great, to build something, to be a part of building something that's bigger than yourself. And that leaves a lasting legacy. That's the people who are remembered fondly in history are those that contribute something, that contribute to something that is bigger than themselves. So I say all that to say there are a few trends I've been keeping track of, as you may have known, especially from my last episode I did on multiculturalism. If you haven't watched the episode on multiculturalism, check it out. But it can be summed up in sort of this gist. Multiculturalism is a failed experiment that America has engaged in. It is the religion of America in the 21st century. The primal creed of multiculturalism is that diversity is our greatest strength. And this idea of multiculturalism believes that we can import the nations of the world, regardless of their culture, and that we can all peacefully coexist together and not have any national unity, that there needs to be no shared values, no shared language, no shared people, that we all just get to be individualistic in our tribal communities. And that is an idea that no nation can survive. We cannot have several competing interest groups. Any nation needs some sort of national unity. And for a while, we had shared national unity through a shared identity. Multiculturalism hollowed out that identity. And now we have the cities that you see today. Go touch grass, go to any of these major cities, and you'll immediately feel nostalgic for any scenes you may have seen in the movies, if you're older than me, for scenes you lived. The 90s, the 80s, the 70s. Need I say any other dates? I'm not going to get myself in trouble. Okay, so mass migration is one of the key components to this multicultural experiment. Currently in America today, we have over 50 million people born in foreign countries who have now come here legally and illegally. And this is a problem because we have so many people coming here, there is no longer any common need to assimilate. If you look all throughout American history, if you want to be radicalized, actually, read some of our first immigration laws. Our first immigration laws had like 4 components. There were only certain people they were allowing to come. It was all Western Europeans. And but there was more to that. There were religious tests. There were character tests. And now you don't even have to be able to speak English to come to this country. That's not a good trend if you haven't picked up on it. If you want to live in India, maybe that's a good trend. If you want to live in Mexico, maybe that's a good trend. Now, I say all this to say, I think it's also important to note that multiculturalism is not an indictment of individuals. Individuals can totally, easily join the American experiment, but it takes time to assimilate. The problem comes when you have so many people coming into this country that they no longer feel a need to assimilate because there's people that came from where they came from and they feel more at home. They feel closer. They feel actually like countrymen to the people that they used to share a country with. This reminds me of a paper I wrote on globalism. and a Christian response to globalism. It was awesome because the paper I wrote, I was actually in a class, and I took a stance that was very adversarial to what most people believe, especially in higher ed these days. Most people believe that multiculturalism is globalism is an incredible good. It's the defining trait of the 21st century, basically post World War II. Globalism has ruled. And I took a very adversarial stand, and I said, hey, Christians need to be cautious of globalism because, well, the first experiment in globalism was man's attempt to reach God at the Tower of Babel. And what did God do? God scattered and created the different distinct nations and peoples and tribes and tongues. Secondly, the world will also have another experiment in globalism, and that's under the unification of the Antichrist. And so I think Christians should actually respect and be fans of the God created national distinctions, be fans of the national sovereignties that God has bestowed upon individual nation states. Well, mass migration kind of takes away from that and makes individual nation states within the nation. It divides more than it unites. It tells people that they belong to certain groups rather than to the nation as a whole. It steals from the inheritors of the American Revolution who had family members, property, value on the line, to people who have no vested interest in the continual good of the nation continuing. You want to know who should be allowed to vote actually in this country? The people that should be allowed to vote are people that have a vested stake in the continual good of this society. I believe it was Benjamin Franklin that said this republic will endure until the day the public realizes that they can vote themselves into other people's money. And that's what we see today, right? You see people who have no regard for property, have no regard for individual rights, because they are selfish and we have so eroded our shared social fabric that they just want what is expedient to them. They want the instant gratification. And if they can vote and give themselves something of others, or if they can vote themselves into the right of being able to take away human life, which is what we see with abortion, they're going to do that. So a big red pill for a lot of you guys is there should only be certain people that are allowed to vote in society. And a good way to do this, mind you, I'm not actually recommending this. I forgot to read my disclaimer at the start, but I guess I'll read it at the end because this is all just political satire and jokes. I don't mean anything that I say. But the only people that should be allowed to vote are people that have a vested interest in the continual good of society. So people that have demonstrated that they actually do have some skin in the game are people who have served in the military. They put their lives on the line for this country, and therefore they have a pretty good claim to who gets to run it. 2, people that own property. If you own land or if you own a house, you actually have skin in the game, and you should be allowed to own property because you don't want people voting themselves into the power to take away your property, or the government just deciding they want to tax you exorbitantly in order to pay for other people. The final group that should be allowed to vote is adults that have children within wedlock. That if you are in a marriage and you have kids who will one day inherit this nation, you also have a very vested interest in society. Now, for these 3 criteria, you don't have to meet all of them. You don't have to be in the military, own property, and have kids within matrimony. No, I think if you fulfill one of these criteria, then it makes sense. You clearly have demonstrated that A, you either have sacrificed for this country, or B, you have a vested interest in the protection of this nation and the continual good of it. The rest of the people, which technically I wouldn't fall into one of those categories. I don't quite yet own property. I am not married. I don't have kids, thankfully. Also, people that have kids but are not married, they definitely don't get to vote in this world because self-explanatory. Anywho, This is just in a made-up fictional world. This is not something that is realistic that could ever happen, but I think it's actually a smart idea. So there's that. Anywho, one more thing quickly on mass migration. As you see, democracy, it's kind of devolved into just various interest groups competing for power over one another. I think of scenes from these Israeli-Palestine protests that have just taken over college campuses, taken over downtown cities. What you see is you see people waving foreign flags, two groups of people, some of them American citizens, a lot of them not, and they're fighting each other in the streets of a country over the interest of foreign countries. You look at wars these days. A lot of wars, citizens from the countries that are fighting will lobby Congress for money for their home, because the truth of the matter is they don't feel at home here. They feel more at home in their foreign nation. They feel like they have more in common with their nation that they left, and they probably do, because they share more things with the people in that nation than they share with us. They share their culture, they share their values, they share their heritage. And so it makes sense, but we got to get to the point where we reclaim this country and we return to the Founding Fathers' vision. Anywho, when I was in Dallas this past fall, I went to a Dallas Cowboy football game. And let's just say the demographic was primarily not English speaking. Most people there that I was observing were Spanish speaking individuals. Anywho, at some point in the third quarter, all of a sudden this Mexican song comes on and it's blaring. And everyone around me, I kid you not, everyone around me starts standing up, linked arm in arm, singing. There are at least 4 flags, full length, like 3x5 flags that come out of people's persons, and they start waving them. They're Mexican flags, by the way. And it just clicked in my head. I got so radicalized in that moment. I'm like, these people will never be fully assimilated into this country because they have no reason to be. They have the shared values. They have the shared language. They have the shared culture. They have the shared heritage of all their fellow countrymen. And so there's no incentive for them to try and partake in American culture, to try and assimilate to American culture, because they already have their group that they belong to. So suffice it to say, we need to cut down on migration, both legal and illegal, until we can figure out just how we are going to reclaim our culture, and until we can assimilate those 50 million people who currently live here. It's not going to be easy. The second thing I want to talk about today is the straying from the Founding Fathers' vision as much as it pertains to foreign conflicts. There is a move on the right that I've seen to be like, all war is bad. We don't want to be involved in any conflict because we don't want to die for anything. And that's an actually super cringe opinion to hold, because some of the greatest men throughout history have been forged through conflict, through war. The difference is, ever since basically Vietnam, we've seen American tax dollars and American lives be expended on military missions and regime changes that had no real effect on the American people themselves. We've seen our brothers and sisters now. Think about that. We've seen our women shipped overseas, dying for causes that, quite frankly, no lay members of America care about. You know who care about them? The lobbyists, the defense contractors, various foreign lobbies who basically own our politicians at this point. We have neoconservatives and neoliberals running the entire show, and there's nobody in Congress who will actually be willing to put America first, be willing to follow in the footsteps of George Washington in his farewell address, where he said, hey, look, guys, God gave us this country that's separated from a majority of the world, a majority of where all the war and all the global conflicts happen. We have God's blessed us with 2 massive oceans separating us from all of that. So why would we get involved? We need to stay out of foreign entanglements, even foreign alliances, because in the nature of all alliances and all wars, there is always a subservient power and there's always a master. And America will devolve into being that country that is a slave to another country. I would contend that there are multiple countries that we are currently slaves to, based off the fact that they own our politicians. They control whether we go to war or not. We don't have politicians that, I would say that a lot of our politicians are people that are willing to listen to the defense contractors and the foreign lobbies over their willingness to listen to the interests of the farmer from Kansas. I personally, I'm a military age man. I don't want to go to war. I don't want to sign up for the US military. Why? Well, partially because I don't think the values that the US represents on a global scale represent the values that I stand for, that my ancestors stood for, and that America, as it was founded, stood for. You see the American government crack down on, it was an African country, I believe it was Uganda. Uganda passed a law where men who raped boys, little boys, would be put to death. I don't have a problem with that. But you see politicians, right side of the aisle, left side of the aisle, condemn this law, want to sanction Uganda, want to use the military to pressure Uganda into changing this law. In what world is this okay? At what level do we as a country stand for the values of Sodom and Gomorrah over the values of Jesus Christ? That's not the country that I want to live in. That's not the military I want to fight for. You see, we've seen over the course of American history, all this progress has really been regressive. And the wars that America was fighting at the beginning were awesome. They were super based. We were basically telling European powers, hey, this is our land and you can't come here. You can't exert your dominance on us because God has given us this land. And by golly, we're going to steward it well and you're not going to interfere. That was the credo of the American Revolution. That was the credo of the War of 1812. That was the credo of the Mexican War. The Mexican War was awesome. The Spanish-American War in 1899, where Teddy Roosevelt and his Rough Riders took on Spain in Cuba, that was so based. I would volunteer to be a part of that war in 5 seconds. What war I don't want to be involved in is a regime change war in a country like Vietnam. I don't want to be involved in a regime change war in Iran. I don't want to go to Iran. Yeah, Iran's a Muslim country, but guess what? I don't care. I want the hearts and minds of people in that country to be saved, to come to faith through Jesus Christ. But I really could care less what Iran wants to do in its own region of the world. Obviously, there is a limiting principle to this. We want to counteract powers that become too powerful, that have visions of dominance, of empire, conquest. We don't want a power to be able to push us around on a global stage, but we want to have the credo of Teddy Roosevelt. We want to talk softly, but carry a big stick. That's what America was great at doing for the longest time. And recently, under our current leadership, we've become the global policeman. And global policemen, not for good, mind you. Global policemen for bad. To enforce our globalist, our pagan practices on the entire world. And I don't think that's a good thing. So, anywho, that's a lot. That's a rant and a half. But I just think it's so important that Christians really stand up and we return to the values that made the West great. Return to the values that made America the best country on earth. Return to the founding fathers' vision for this country. Return to building something grandiose for the inheritors of that revolution. Return to loving our countrymen by standing up for them, by protecting their interests. Who looks out for the interests of heritage Americans anymore? No one. And we need a new breed of people that's willing to advocate for us on a global scale, that's willing to stand up and say, no, America was a Christian country. And by golly, America's going to be a Christian country once again when we take power. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the Weekly Briefing. As always, my name is Grant May. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter. I'm more active on Instagram, obviously. You can write me there. I'd love to hear from you. But thank you for tuning in. Be sure and share this episode with your friends on social media. We're available on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. I love my YouTube listeners, specifically the men that listen on YouTube. We don't want simps listening to the Counteract Girls podcasts. they're great. We love the girls at Counteract USA, but the guys, y'all gotta watch guys. You can't just be watching girls, or else you're gonna fall into being a simp. Anywho, let me know what you want to hear about next week. I'm open to suggestions, but I've greatly enjoyed this episode, so thank you for tuning in.